Hi, and welcome to another episode of Prevailing Through Pain, where I'm talking to healthcare heroes. And today we have Dr. Melissa Glass. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I really appreciate being here. It is an honor and a privilege.
So first of all, I want to say thank you for, being here to share your story. And I know that, life has dealt you some cards that sometimes other people probably would have tried to throw back, but you dealt with those cards and you are who you are today. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your humble beginnings, where you were born and...
Sure, most definitely. So first and foremost, I just want to say that I love the word humble because that's where I remained in my life for sure and want to remain humble. And so I actually was raised and born in Lake Providence, Louisiana.
Okay.
Very small rural area. It's about 6 hours from Texas. And so I was raised there with my mother, and my father was there initially, and then my grandparents. And so as life would have it, I ended up living with my grandparents after my sister passed. And so raised in a shotgun house. I don't know how many people have heard that term, but definitely it was an area that if anyone ever wanted to look it up in Reader's Digest, it was once classified as the poorest city in the United States.
Really?
And so, yes. So that's where I was raised. Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you had a sibling that died?
I did. My mom, I had a sister. I'm the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a sister that passed at 7 months.
Mm-hmm.
And, now that I'm an adult, I realize that is traumatic for the parents. And so I realized that my mom, of course, went through some, depression there, and her and my father divorced. And so then my grandparents, I went to stay with them. And, grandparents are so nurturing until I never wanted to leave. So my mother was definitely there, but I always resided in my grandparents' home until I moved out.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your teen life.
Yes. So, growing up, first of all, I will say that at the age of 16, I really started wanting to, what we say, kids are starting to grow up and think that they're adults.
Yeah.
And want to try things. And so I started, wanting to be out, go do things that my mother didn't approve of. Neither did my grandmother at the time, because my grandfather passed when I was in 3rd grade. And so with that, I also started wanting to be with my dad, because I was like, okay, my mom won't let me do it, but I would love to connect with my dad. My dad and I never really had a close relationship. I can recall when I was a little girl, I would be playing outside and he would just pass by, wouldn't stop. And so with that, I started wanting to go. And so I did go stay with my dad briefly because, again, if your mom won't let you or your grandmother won't let you, you're trying to go to see who will let you.
Right.
And so my dad, is where I went, and I stayed with him briefly. And what I learned from that was, he let me do whatever,
So there are the children in the house with your dad?
There was only a stepdaughter, and is what he had at the time, and he was married, and his wife was there. And so he would just let me do whatever, never really, hugged me as a matter, and never really gave me direction, right? So sometimes as kids, we want to go and do these things, but for me, I was longing for more. And one of the things that I was longing for is a relationship with my dad. One that would just hug me and say, I love you, or one that would say, you're doing a great job, I'm proud of you. So I never received that. I never received it. And so eventually, also, as he wasn't providing like my mother was, I decided I would go back home. But during that span of time, I did start, looking for that attention in other men, specifically young boys that was my age, teenage boys, as well as some that was even older. And so that is how that unhealthy relationship started there as a teenager. Yeah. And so that's where it started.
And and I hear that in women, and I'm one of those people that my dad, my mom and dad, when I was 11 months, splitting, and his parents actually raised us. And whenever he would even come to town, he wasn't trying to, like you said, your dad would pass by. Sometimes I wouldn't even know my dad was in town. He lived 90 miles away. And someone would say, "Oh, I saw your dad," and it would be kind of hurtful. And even though I felt his parents, again, my grandparents, I felt that they did the best that they could, loved me the best that they knew how, but it's still that parents' love that
exactly,
and especially like you said, that dad, because if I think it's whichever parent is not there,
yes,
we're yearning for that parent's love,
exactly.
And sometimes for me, I'd say poor choices. Now, I couldn't get a boyfriend when I was younger. Boys were so mean; they tell me I was too ugly, so I couldn't get a boyfriend. But but it was still yearning for a male's affection. And my grandfather, he just sit in front of the television and he had raised his kids. So,
Yeah.
So now you have the two women that are trying to do the best they can with raising you. Those teenage, but we grown now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Don't know nothing, but we grown.
Exactly.
So you got past the teenage stage without a child, with a child.
I actually, so I got pregnant at 17.
At 17.
So at 17, I got pregnant, and so that means I was a senior. I was a senior in high school, and I'll be honest, I was devastated when I found out. But at the same time, because I was one that used to say I didn't want any kids. I was one that used to say that I didn't want any kids. But guess what? I was, indulging in behavior, right? Not even thinking twice about what I'm doing because I was looking for love. I mean, from my father. And so then I turned to, my oldest child's father. And so with that, got pregnant at 17. And then I graduated from high school. And so I had my daughter at 18. And so when I had her, I was like, okay. I mean, I'll be honest, I was a pretty good student. I mean, it was a small town, so there was only 88 students. And so I was number 7 of 88 students. I was an honor student, I had the ability, right? And so I graduated, but then I told my mom I didn't want to go to college at that point because I said, I have my daughter, and I just believe that, sometimes we even turn to other things for love. So at that point, I wanted to nurture and love her. It was almost like going back into a kid stage of that doll baby that you love. And so I did not go initially to college. And I'll never forget it. I was working at a little dollar store, Fred's Dollar Store. But I believe that there's a purpose for everything that happens in our life. And so even working at that dollar store, I remember how it gave me that fulfillment of connecting with people or learning how to be able to speak to people, learning how to have relationships, learning how to work. I mean, it was my foundation. And so I stayed there for a little bit until then I decided, okay, well, I'm going to go to take up a trade or certificate type. And that is when I went to LPN school. And here in Texas, it's called LVN, Licensed Vocational Nurse.
Right.
And so I went there, and still, at that time, my daughter and her father and I were still together. We thought, I said, oh, yes, now this is where I'm going to be. I'm going to finish, LPN school, and this is the love of my life. We're going to get a house together. So were you married at this time? No, we never got married. But come to find out, that wasn't the love of my life because, again, it turned into an unhealthy relationship. And that relationship evolved around a lot of, verbal abuse, but then at the same time, there was a lot of cheating going on, right? Because we're still kids, literally, 18, but still don't know what we're doing.
Right.
And so that relationship did not remain. And so then that means now I got one child by myself. It's me. It's just me
and the doll baby.
And the doll baby. That's it. And I got my grandmother and my mother. And I will say, my mother, she began to help me with my child. Help me with my oldest and help me raise her. And so then I finished LPN school. I finished that in 1999. And then I was like, okay, this is it. I can be an LPN. I can do this. So I worked a little bit, but then as an LPN, and so then I still looking for love. Don't forget now, I'm still having that void of wanting a relationship because now I got a child by myself.
Career.
And
You know, it dawned on me. That's 4
Yeah.
generations. You said your grandmother, your mother, you, and your
Yes.
baby. 4 generations of women.
Exactly. And so I, at that point, I was like, I'm looking for love again. And I met the gentleman that I did marry, and I actually moved away from Lake Providence. I moved to a city called Bastrop, Louisiana, which was about 45 minutes, almost an hour from my mother. My mother and my grandmother were devastated, you know, because at the time I was still around them. And I left, and I took my baby with me. That was my thing is, you know, I had her, I got to go. And so when I left, I met this gentleman, and he, I'll be honest, you know, he definitely wasn't the one for me either. You know, now that I look back on life, and he was verbally abusive as well as physical. And so, but
So what do you think initially attracted you to him?
honestly, if I think about it, because he, you know, he did have a history of, you know, a criminal history. And I'm like, oh, I don't even know why I would have turned to him. But when I think about it more, and now that I have seeked out, it's still that void, you know, as women, until we go through the healing of what we're really missing, until we reach that inner soul.
Yeah. And I ask that because I don't share this story very often. My first husband was very verbally abusive. And one night he actually even came home and threatened to beat me. And I had seen that movie Burning Bed with Farrah Fawcett. And I tied him to the bed. And I left him tied to the bed for the weekend. But, you know, I met him when he was paroled. He had been paroled, and I never knew anyone that had been in the penitentiary. I was living in California, you know, 18, and my aunt and his uncle were a couple, and so I was living with my aunt. My aunt decided to move in with his uncle, and here he comes, and my aunt had warned me, you know, now he's been in the penitentiary, and I'm like, you know, thinking, oh my God. Then I see this guy that looked like a regular guy, so I don't know what a penitentiary person is supposed to look like. But I knew he had history, but I think because same thing, you know, that not loving myself and him paying me some attention, we were married. Oh my God. So I feel you on that one.
Yes. And that was me. You know, I can remember my grandmother saying, because again, he had a criminal history. Also, I was just like you, he had been released on parole. I had no clue what that meant. I had no clue of what prison was or anything. And I can remember my grandmother saying to me, she says, all I can do now is pray for you, pray. And she said, my prayer is that no one gets hurt, and that you don't get hurt, and that your daughter doesn't get hurt. And so I stayed there. We got married. Never forget, on a Christmas day, my mother came. My grandmother was not able to come, and a few of my aunts and uncles even came, but they were not happy. But they were of who I was choosing. They were not happy, but they were still trying to be supportive in a sense. And so with that, my dad, I did invite my dad. And I think that this is where, as women, we have to think about it. I invited my dad to that wedding, and he seemed as though he was going to come. But the day of, he told me he could not. He called, and he said he could not give me away, that he knew that wasn't the man for me, and that he would not give me away. I think that was my dad's way of dealing with it, but I think back on it that, maybe if my dad had done something differently in that sense, or reached out in a sense, would my life have been different?
You know, the funny thing with me, well, you said your dad didn't come. Well, my ex-husband's mom didn't come to the wedding because she said I was too dark and not pretty enough to be married to her son, which was an ex-convict.
Isn't that interesting?
Figure that one out.
Exactly. Exactly.
And maybe had she come, I wouldn't have married him because she would have acted out, and I might have thought, you think about those scenarios.
Exactly. So we went through with the wedding, and then after that, I did have 2 more children actually with him. So I have a daughter that is the middle daughter, and then I have a son. And so had 2 children. And so my mom was always, even though she was 45 minutes away, I would tell you, she is the one that she wasn't, happy about my choices, but she would always do what she could to help me. Because remember, now this is a man with a criminal background, alcohol, drugs, he wasn't consistently working, but I was.
And you were an LPN?
I was an LPN.
At this time?
Yes, I was consistently
Which was a better
working.
job than most people.
Yes, consistently working, just hoping, my thing, I always kept saying, I don't want to be a single parent. I want to give my children the best life. And so with that, you think that you're doing the best thing, but we're not, because again, there's some unhealed pain that is going on. And so had my 2 children stayed to the point, I even took some of the abuse. Like you said, I mean, he drugged me once with a car. He was physical and verbal. But I will say, sometimes you wonder, how did my eyes come open to say, okay, enough is enough. It's time to leave. And so I did, one night, I think it's always, for me, it's always been late night. It reveals to me that there's a better life. There's a better life for you. There's a better life for the children. And so I reached out to one of my cousins and I told her I was ready to leave. And so she said, you need to come to Texas. And so I left initially and went stay with my mother briefly, but I just knew that wasn't where I needed to be. In that rural area, I still wanted a better life for my kids. I wanted them to be able to experience things that I did not experience. Right. And so that is how I ended up here in Texas, because I do have cousins and aunts and uncles that all live here. Yeah.
And that's wonderful to be able to have a support team that says, come here, because unfortunately, we know some people don't have that, and
Correct.
It's the streets that usually gets those people.
Exactly.
So you came to Texas, and how was that? What part of Texas did you originally come to?
So I came initially to Arlington.
Oh, okay.
So one of my aunts welcomed me in, and I stayed with them. So you come here. Now I'm with 3 kids. In
the big city.
In the big city. And I'll be honest, I was scared. I was scared because I came from either from Bastrop, like Providence, all of those are small rural areas. We don't have the highways and the, things like that. And so I was like, how am I going to drive out here? What am I going to do? And so my cousin that invited me to come, she started teaching me about going back and forth to Dallas. And so my baby was 2 years old. My son was 2. And then I had my oldest who was 6. And then my middle daughter, she was actually 4 at the time. And so with that, started learning how to drive out here in Texas. And then I started looking for work as an LVN because I had gotten my license to come to Texas to be endorsed here. Okay. So found work, started working. Of course, again, you think you're doing well because you're making more money compared to Louisiana to here. I like, okay, I think I can do this. I think I can do this. But at the same time, still looking for love. Still looking for love. And so actually met a couple gentlemen out here in Texas. Again, were not the right ones for me. So
hold that thought, and we're going to take a sponsor break. We'll be right back.
Sure.
Do you have a powerful story of perseverance? Have you triumphed over pain and want to share your story with the world? We're looking for inspiring guests to join us on the Prevailing Through Pain podcast. Head over to karencherry.me/guest. Fill out the form and let us know your story. Your voice could be the one to inspire others. Your experience could be the one to lift up someone else. Go to karencherry.me/guest.
And we're back. So, still looking for love, living in the big city of Arlington, Texas, with 3 children, working as an LVN, I think is what we call it.
Yes.
So you met a couple of guys and
and I will tell you that at that point I started, in my profession, I was starting to seek out because I did see that there was opportunities. There was opportunities for me to grow in my profession. So I started connecting with people, at various jobs that I was working, and I was like, I want to go back to school. that's, how sometimes again, when we still got things we're dealing with inside of us or emotionally, but we find ways to be busy. Also, as women, I got 3 kids. I got to provide. So I said, okay, I want to go back to school. I want to do that. And so I started researching how can I get my RN? Because by now, I'm about 10 years into, or getting close to 10 years as an LVN. And so I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? But I said, I can't do this by myself. I need some help. So that is another reason why I was looking for love, is I was like, okay, if I can find love, this gentleman, someone that loves me, he can help me.
Right.
He can help me with school. He can help me with the kids. We can build this like wonderful life. And so I met the one gentleman, and I was like, okay, we can do this. And so I started going to get my prerequisites, finishing up prerequisites for RN school. And I was like, okay, getting through the prerequisites. But by the way, now still having these ups and downs in this relationship that I'm trying to force to work.
Yeah.
So that's how, and then I was able to complete my associate's degree of nursing. That was my first degree.
Congrats.
Thank you.
I don't know if you knew that I tried to become a nurse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. My first semester, I gained 14 pounds in that 16 weeks because doing like the clinical piece of it. Yeah, it was just so hard for me. So I applaud nurses. I applaud nurses because it was just hard for me. I think it was the part of when I had a patient that was dying. Yes. I just couldn't do it. So I said it takes a really strong person to be able to be there for those individuals and do their job. So, all right. So now you
got my associate's degree of nursing. Also, the other thing is my kids were able to pin me. All 3 kids attended my pinning ceremony, and they pinned me. My mother came. That's why I say she was my rock. She was always my champion behind the scene of everything that I did. And so completed that, again, still in a relationship. And I'll tell you, with this relationship that I was in, it was never physical abuse, but there was definitely verbal abuse there. There was also a lot of cheating, right, with other women that he was dealing with. And so what I say to that is, again, when we don't heal, we accept things that we know that are unacceptable. And so that's
at least he's not hitting me.
He's not hitting me. We justify.
Did he have a job?
Off and on.
And when he's bringing money in,
yes.
And when he's good, he's good.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
We justify. We try to justify everything. And so,
but he loves me.
He loves me. He loves me. He's able to take the kids to different events that I can't get to because I'm working. So we justify. I justified, I should say. And so in that justification, I said, okay, I got my associates. But then I started yearning for more. What else can I do in my profession? And don't forget, I have people that I'm connecting with in the profession that are saying, you're smart. You can do more. I see great potential in you. And I'm like, okay.
Thank God for those people in our lives, right?
Yes. And so then I went back to school, got my bachelor's degree. I got my bachelor's of nursing. And so I'm like, okay, I got this. And I'll be honest, I was elevating in my profession. I had started working in the hospital, in acute care setting. I was liking it. And I started doing different things because I've always loved leadership, being a charge nurse. And so, but still got my kids over there on the sideline. And don't forget, you have ups and downs. When you're raising kids, there's no right playbook for that.
Right.
You go through the trials of that. And so, okay, get my bachelor's degree. And then they say, okay, what's next? What's next? Get my master's degree. I get my master's with an emphasis in education because I love teaching. I was a preceptor. I've taught, And so I said, okay, I did that. And by the way, when I finished my master's, my mother, she says, I don't do airplanes, Melissa. I'm not going to get on an airplane. So she came to Texas and she stayed because I went to Arizona because I got my master's degree from a college, Grand Canyon University. And so I went out there to participate. the gentleman went with me. He did. He went with me. And my mom stayed back with the kids because she's not going to get on the airplane, and we were not driving to Arizona. And so I participated in that ceremony and came back. My mom had set up a nice celebration for me at the house, had kept the kids. And so again, my mother's there, but again, I'm still trying to hang on to this gentleman that I know is, has his other women on the side, but I'm like, but he's here with me, And so
they're the other woman. We love to say that too.
Yes.
They're the other woman. I'm his real woman.
Yes. Justification. And so I stayed there. And so then the last thing was, it's just like I woke up again one night and God said, you know that man does not love you. You know that is not where you need to be. And again, as a woman and with a single parent, with my kids, a lot of times we say we don't want to be a single mom, but we're really single anyway.
Right?
I was single anyway. And what we're thinking is healthy for the presence of our children is really not. And it wasn't healthy for my children. So I finally told him, I'm done. And his words to me was, okay, but you'll be back. Because we had stopped talking off and on through periods, but I would always go back. I would always justify. And I said, no, I won't be back. I said, and don't you come around. And so I say truly that was the power of God, because I don't know how I got the strength to do it, but I finally said, I'm done.
Thank you.
I'm done. And he was very cunning and very, with his words and things, but I stopped answering, and then he did not come back. And at that point, I was at a point of surrendering. I said, God, I surrender. I surrender to you. Help me love me. Help me love me. And then I realized, Melissa, your strength of raising the kids is not in a man, it's in God. And so I really started leaning toward raising my kids, praying with them. They're older now, right? They're teenagers. So I'm starting to experience some of the teenage things the things that I put my parent through, now I'm getting it. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And I'll tell any mother, it is not easy. But in that surrendering, God was able to, he was steady providing, making a way for me. So then I decided I'm going to go back for my doctorate. I'm going to go back and get my doctorate of nurse practice because, again, I'm working in leadership. I want to make a difference. I want to be able to help, our patients that we are caring for, help our nurses. And so I did that. In the meantime, while I'm going through with my doctorate, I met my husband, and I told him, though, because I had surrendered, I said, look, I don't have time for distractions. I am here with, raising the kids. My son now is 17. My two girls, they're young adults. My middle daughter, she was able to go to college, and my oldest, she decided she didn't want to do that right now. And so my now husband said, I'm not here to distract you. He says, I'm not here to distract you. And I was like, okay, that's what you say. I don't believe you. I mean, I'll be honest. And my husband and I, we are both from the same area. And we met by going back because he was divorced. And I went back to help my mom because she wanted to live in Lake Providence still. And she said, Melissa, you never come back for the homecoming. There's a big homecoming that happened every October where all the classes that graduated from that community, they come back. I said, Mom, I really don't have time. She said, you need to come back. And I came back, and my husband and I both, for the first time, had went back to the homecoming. He had never been either, and that's how we met.
That is funny.
We met at the homecoming.
So let me ask you this about school, because being a single parent with children, you hear people say, well, I can't afford to go to school. So how were you able to go to school?
Yes. So I will be totally honest, is one of the things I did was some of the organizations that I was working for, they have things like tuition reimbursement. They have other services that they help with. The other thing is grants sometime will work. And then the last thing is student loans. And I did have student loans, and I do have student loans. And so with that, though, I still prayed, though. I didn't want my kid to have student loans. And so I would pray with them, and I would tell them, I had a cheer around the house. You know, I'm old school. I'll make up an acronym. I'll make up a cheer. I'll make it however to encourage them. And I used to say FREE. If you want to believe it, you can have a free education. And so I would do that. And my middle daughter, the way we did it was we searched out. There are scholarships out there. We just have to look. They're not visible. We got to search. And so my middle daughter, we searched, and she was able to get a full ride academic scholarship to Langston University. And so I say
Oklahoma.
for me,
I don't know if you know I'm from Tulsa.
Yes. And so she got a free undergrad. But I would say, based on what you asked me, is that I did. I took out student loans, and those loans truly were to also help me be able to provide for my family, right? And so I did that, but I had the faith to know that, you know, yes, this is, I used to say, I tell my kids it's going to get greater later. It was only for the moment, and that's what God opened the door for me
later.
to go.
I like that.
Yeah, I used to tell them it's going to get greater later.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer if you put it out there, you know, if you believe. And I've heard people say that I have faith of a mustard seed, that it says in the Bible.
Yes.
And I never knew any other way to be. I mean, like if I asked God for it, I believed it was going to come to pass. And it always has. My grandmother used to always say, but Karen, be careful what you ask God for.
Yes.
You know, because sometimes those things did happen. And I was like, oh, so then I learned to ask God what it was that He wanted me to have.
Yes. And so you're right. You know, be careful what we ask for, because you don't know. God has He has His own plan. Right. We can ask and we think we have the strategy or the plan, but God says, my plan is greater and better. Yes. And so that's what I learned from that is don't focus on, you know, just the way that it's going to happen, but just trust God and know that He's going to make it happen. And so I went on and did my doctorate of nurse practice. And I will tell anyone, I completed that during the pandemic.
Wow.
I completed it during the pandemic. My mother got sick as well, so I had to bring my dear mother here to Texas. But I just want to put a thing that, again, God's plan. Remember, I had just met my husband, Norman. We weren't married at the time. We were dating. So he could have easily said, no, I'm not here to distract you, but you got a lot of things that's happening. Right? So you're thinking, I'm going to distract you, but he could have said, I got to get out of here because she's distracting me. But he didn't. He stayed there, and he helped me with my mom. He helped me go get my mother.
Wow.
Bring her from Louisiana to here. He helped me take care of my mom where he had to help me pick her up. You know, he knew that I was bathing my mom, all of that, because I promised my mom I would not put her in a nursing facility. And so I'm still working. Pandemic has occurred. My son's 17 in high school. A lot is happening. And school now is closed because they are now virtual.
So he's at the house all the time.
Then my middle daughter, who's at Langston, had to come back and go virtual. And now my mom's sick. But thank goodness I had Norman, and I had my aunts and my uncles and some of my cousins. That was a great support team. We were all taking turns to take my mom to her appointments, hospital visit, hospitalizations, the whole nine. I had a good support team with me. And so my mom, you know, would see me with my laptop, because remember, while I'm in doctoral school, I had to do my dissertation. I had to get ready and do that manuscript. And I remember telling my mom and Norman, I can't do this. I can't. I guess this is not what it's meant to be. Maybe I didn't hear God right. I shouldn't get my doctorate. And I remember my mom looking at me while she was in the hospital, and I had my laptop there. she said, it is what God has for you. You're being obedient. You're honoring me as your mother. And you're going to finish. And even when I say it now, I get chills. And Norman I was like, I don't know. He said, it is for you. He said, it is. You've made it this far. It is for you. And so I kept making the revisions as they would send it back to me. I had gotten my project approved, but couldn't get the manuscript across the finish line at the time. And finally, I did. I got the manuscript across. I'll never forget my mentor from Grand Canyon University when she called me on a Sunday. She said, I answered, and she said, hello, Dr. Melissa Mitchell is what my name was at the time. And I just screamed. I hollered the whole nine. And then my mom was like, what's wrong with you? And I told my mom, and I just fell to my mom. And at that time, as you all know, we were in a pandemic, so we couldn't have a in-person graduation. We did it virtual. So I still have the video, and I listened to my mom in the background of saying congratulations, and I had gotten my doctorate. And so that was 2020.
I want to share a story with you. So it took me 15 years to get my master's degree. When I decided to go to school, worked on the associates, then the bachelor's, and the master's. And my mom was the person that encouraged me to go to school. So I started, trying to do nursing. And when I said that wasn't me, I switched my major to business. And just probably the last semester, the semester was almost over because it was almost time for me to graduate with my master's degree. The doctors told my mom she had 3 weeks to live, right? And I was actually in California working. My mom was in Oklahoma. So I left the account. I told them because I had my own, I guess I hadn't started my business, but I was doing consulting for another company. And I told them, I said, I need to go to Oklahoma and I won't be back until, I bury my mom. And so when you were saying what you were saying as far as, so I'm working on my dissertation. When I first start a new semester, I would always see if there were students that wanted to have a work study group. And so I was doing this class online. When I first started my master's, I'm online, and there was this guy I never met. I can't remember name, don't remember what state he lived in, but we were in a study group together. And he called me as I'm sitting there on my laptop next to my mother's bed, because I'm working on my dissertation on one side of my laptop. Then I would flip over when my mom would go to sleep, and I'm putting together her obituary. I'm taking care of her funeral and working on that. Same, and I'm saying, God, I need strength. I need some help here. That guy called me. He said, if memory serves me right, this should be your last semester. And he said, I know you helped take care of your mom. You were flying out. I told him, I'm at the hospital next to my mom right now. She's dying. He said, what are you doing it's my thesis. What are you doing your thesis on? And I told him what I was doing my thesis on. That next day when I woke up, when I tell you, he must have sent me about 20 pages of things that had to do with my thesis. So I know that there's a God, and I know when we have that will and we put it out there, because I wish I could find that guy today, because he was my angel. And that's been my promise to God. I want to be able to be that blessing to whoever I can, however I can, whenever I can. And I know from, just us starting to build a relationship as we go to the same church. I know that's your heart, and I know that's, who you are. And so today you recently, John Maxwell certified.
I did.
Yeah.
So the one thing I did was I promised God that I would tell my story. So as you mentioned, we go to the same church and we've connected, is that I tried to avoid it, telling my story. And so, but I remember God will bring us back to what he said and what I promised him. And so I said, I'm going to start telling my story. So recently, I started this back last year in 2023, saying, okay, you're real busy in leadership, you're real busy doing things, but you're not telling your story. So that's when I decided to join the John Maxwell team, and I got certified this past August this year. And thank you. And I got certified. And so when I met you, I was like, well, that's what I've been working on, is trying to do more of, public speaking, sharing my story. Also hoping to empower others of growth and being resilient, and understanding that, there may be some pain and hurt, but how do we work through that? How do we go to God? How do we find counseling or whatever it may be and work through that and be able to heal? So that, because each one of us have a story and a mission and a purpose that we have to fulfill here on earth.
Amen. So with that being said, what would you say to that young parent that's trying to figure out what to do next because life has dealt her some cards that she didn't anticipate?
Sure. Thank you. So what I would say first and foremost, I love acronyms. So I have acronyms for many things, and that because that encourages me. So the first thing I would say to her is know that opposition, so O2 is opposition. But if opposition comes, that's okay. Because guess what? If God opened the door, opposition will come. But you got to press forward. And it's okay to sit and face whatever the pain may be. Face it. If it takes you writing it down, if it takes you journaling through it, whatever it may be, face it. But know that there is a brighter side once you face it and walk through it. So the one thing I always had was one scripture that I stuck with me, and it says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that it is a test of your faith that will produce patience." And so with that, we know that we're going to have trials, but if God opened the door, just know that He's going to bring you out of it. And you're going to have a story to tell. You're going to have a fulfillment within. You're going to have a transformation that is going to give you so much joy. So I would tell that young lady is to press forward. Press forward.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So Dr. Melissa, I want to ask you a question, because being in healthcare myself and starting out as a frontline technician, working my way through the healthcare arena, and I'm sure that's in life general, but that's my background, and since we're both healthcare, I had a lot of challenges, and I'm just curious as to, as you advance through your career, any challenges that you may have encountered?
Oh yes, most definitely. I've definitely encountered challenges in my career as well. And so, like you said, I started out frontline staff, and have worked my way through, and now I am in leadership. And one of the things that I have learned is that we're now talking more about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what I see is there's a lot of talk about it, but how do we truly embrace it and bring it into where we are today? And so there's still work to be done. And that is one of the reasons why I do serve in leadership. That is one of the reasons why I did go to the John Maxwell and get my certification, because I also want to make sure that I'm growing, but that I also can add value to what we need to see in leadership. And so some of the challenges that I have experienced is sometimes it's only me as a Black woman sitting around the table. And sometimes my voice doesn't always get heard. But what I've learned is to pause, and I ask God every morning, what is one thing that you want me to say and do today that will, one, bring your light forward, but will help others. And so specifically, the one thing I say when I say others, I'm talking about my community as a Black community, because our, in certain zip codes, they're not receiving the education around healthcare prevention. They're not receiving the healthcare that they need. And so that is what I set out to do, is to educate our community about, awareness and prevention.
And I think that's something that's still swept up under the rug. It's one of those things I always say, it doesn't mean anything to you until it means something to you, you know, and so
Right.
with the DEI, people just act like if it doesn't affect them, this is something that we don't need this, or I don't know why people are making a big deal out of this. And
Correct.
it still needs to be a big deal until someone does something different. And it's usually those at the top of whatever that organization is that needs to require, demand that this is something that everyone has to go through to understand how to be more in tune, more sensitive to others' needs. And I feel like especially in healthcare, because we're supposed to be those servants for our communities.
Yes.
So yeah, for me it was, you know, trying to get a seat at the table. Told many a times no, as far as even trying to advance, even if I was the one most qualified. You know, but I'm a lot older than you, so my challenges were a little different, and that's why it still concerns me today when I hear someone say, I'm still having challenges. Now we're at the table, but just be quiet. We're going to give you a seat at the table, but just sit there and look pretty.
Yes.
No.
Yes. And that's a lot of it is that we are at the table, like you said, and they don't want you to speak up, or they say be aware of what you're saying, or they will say all the time they don't want you to give the facts, right? They want to sweep it under the rug or give lies. And so that is why, you know, I have continued in leadership. It's because I truly believe that, yes, the struggles are there. But we got to have the struggles are real, but we got to have more Black people and more minority people that sit at the table. We're going to have to force organizations to say, yes, you're saying DEI, but have you looked at how many minorities do you have that are on your executive team? How many minorities do you have that sit in the C-suite? Because if you actually ask them to look at that, all the time you will see that there's not many, or there may be none. And so that is why we got to continue, because who better to say what should happen in nursing or healthcare about a Black woman, maternal deaths, than a Black woman. So we need more of our Black nurses in leadership so that they can advocate for our Black moms, where we see a very high problem with maternal deaths with our women. And so that is why I sit at the table, or will continue to grow in leadership, and continue with my doctorate. What I do is look at evidence-based practice and research, right? And so that is why I want to be there to say, enforce the fact of, let's look at what does the evidence say? What is the research saying? What can we do to help our Black families or our minority families so that they can get better health care?
And I want to say, and for those of you that are at the table, reach back and pull someone else up, because it's a lot of room at that table, and no one can take anything from us that is for us. So quit being afraid, if you are at the table, to let somebody else join you at the table.
Yes, totally. Well said. Well said. Is that, you know, we are going through now, you know, generations that are coming along behind us, right? And so we have to be very intentional about bringing forth other younger, you know, minorities to say, you can do this. Because the one thing I see now in healthcare is more and more, you know, our Gen Zs and, you know, as generations are changing, they're not wanting to stay at the front line long, right?
No.
And that's okay, because they have a lot to offer us. And so we need to be able to pull them along and mentor them and support them and show them the way.
And I know the listeners will be inspired, because your story is truly a testament.
Thank you.
So I can't wait to see chapter 2 of the Dr. Melissa Glass story.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.